In the red silence of ancient Morocco, the earth did not hide a dinosaur. It hid a nightmare cast in bone, a creature with a collar of spikes, armor fused to its body, and a silhouette so unnatural that it feels less like evolution and more like a warning left behind by a lost world. Now imagine the moment when a paleontologist brushes ancient stone, hoping to uncover a familiar fragment of rib, vertebra, or tooth, and instead something begins to emerge from the rock that looks more like the fantasy of an artist inspired by monster films than a real animal from the Jurassic period. Not just bone, not just armor, but spikes, as if they had grown out of the skeleton itself, as if the earth had once decided to create a living being that would look less like a creature of prehistoric forests and more like something born from a dream where nature stopped playing by its usual rules. That is exactly the kind of discovery that was made in Morocco. The creature was given the name Spicomellus, and even the name itself sounds as if it contains the crack of stone, the scrape of armor, and the threat of a world in which the weak were given no second chances. This is one of the strangest animals ever found among the early armored dinosaurs, and its strangeness is not in its size, not in fangs, not in some monstrous jaws. On the contrary, it was a plant-eating dinosaur, relatively small, moving on 4 legs, but its defenses were so radical, so unusual, that even against the fantastical backdrop of dinosaur history, it looks like a challenge to our imagination. We are used to thinking of armored dinosaurs as the heavy war machines of later ages, creatures with shields of bone, tail clubs, and dense protection designed for direct confrontation with predators. But Spicomellus lived much earlier, in the Middle Jurassic, around 167 to 163 million years ago. This was a time when dinosaurs were only beginning to explore many of the forms that would later become iconic. It was a world before the great tyrannosaurs, before the giant horned monsters of the late Cretaceous, before many of the classic giants of paleontology. And suddenly, on that ancient stage, he appears, an armored phantom covered in spikes. The most astonishing thing about this discovery is that its spikes, or at least some of them, were not simply embedded in the skin. As with many animals that carry defensive structures, they were connected to the skeleton in an extraordinarily intimate way. For scientists, this was a genuine shock, because what stood before them was not just another dinosaur with armor, but a biological construction that would have been almost impossible to predict in advance. Imagine a creature whose defenses are not worn on top of the body like a suit of armor, but seem to grow out of the very architecture of its bones, as if a house were built not from walls and a roof, but all at once as a spiked fortress. And this is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Why did evolution take such a path at all? Why did nature, which more often prefers compromise, economy of energy, and gradual refinement of form, suddenly seem to leap into an extreme and create an animal that resembled living barbed wire? To understand this, we need to return in our minds to Jurassic Morocco. Not the dry, dusty, sun-scorched landscape of today, but a completely different world. Back then, this land held rivers, floodplains, dense vegetation, wet habitats, entire ecosystems where life already thrived in dozens of astonishing forms. This was an Africa we can barely imagine without the help of science. Green, restless, full of sound. And in that world, a young armored dinosaur was not a master. It was prey that had to survive. When we think of defense, we often imagine speed, strength, or the ability to hide. But for plant-eating dinosaurs, the challenge was different. They did not hunt, they did not choose the moment of attack. They had to live beside danger constantly, every day, every step, every movement of the head toward low vegetation could become the last if a predator was hiding nearby. And so evolution searched again and again for the same answer. Make the body difficult to bite. Make the attack too costly. Make the predator, after one glance, decide to look for something easier. Spicomellus pushed this idea almost to madness. Spikes on the neck reaching nearly a meter in length, armor across the body. A silhouette that in itself was already a warning. And the neck is especially important here. That is no accident. In many animals, the neck remains a vulnerable zone. It is where a predator tries to latch on, to rob its prey of movement, disrupt its breathing, and bring it down. To shield the neck with spikes is to turn one of the deadliest weaknesses into a lethal barrier. It is as if nature were saying, "So, you want to bite here? Then first, try to get through the spears." But perhaps it was not only about defense, and that makes the story even more beautiful. In many modern animals, bright or extreme structures serve several purposes at once. They frighten enemies, help individuals recognize their own kind, and play roles in displays, rivalry, and courtship. Perhaps for Spicomellus, its terrifying spiny appearance was not just a shield, but also a language of the body. Perhaps it was saying with its form, "I am dangerous, I am mature, I am strong, I am not like the others." Perhaps those spikes were part of an ancient theater of life in which survival and the impression one made were sometimes almost the same thing. And here is what is especially mesmerizing. The discovery from Morocco breaks more than a single stereotype about what dinosaurs looked like. It strikes much deeper. It shows that the history of armored dinosaurs was far more experimental, far wilder than we are used to imagining. We like to picture evolution as a neat staircase, step by step, form by form. But reality seems to resemble a storm of ideas. Nature tries things, fails, finds strange solutions, creates forms that later disappear without leaving direct descendants shaped the same way. Spicomellus is not just a dinosaur. It is fossilized proof that life in the past was bolder than our imagination. In a way, this really is a prehistoric Godzilla. Not because it was a giant smashing cities, of course not, but because there is in its image that same cinematic impossibility that makes the mind stumble for a second. We look at a reconstruction and think, this cannot be real. Too many spikes, a body too strangely built, too theatrical, too beautifully terrifying. And yet it was real. Millions of years ago, across ancient landscapes, there walked a creature that looked like the embodiment of defense pushed to its absolute limit. And then, another important question arises. If the Earth once created such a monster, how many more like it are still hidden in stone? How many forms of life vanished without a trace, leaving us no full skeleton, never entering museums, never becoming part of textbooks? Paleontology is a science not only of what has been found, but also of what has been lost. We see only fragments, a few bones, an imprint, a piece of jaw, sometimes a single rib, sometimes one vertebra. And behind those fragments stood whole worlds, entire evolutionary lineages, animals with shapes, behaviors, colors, and movements that we may not yet even know how to imagine correctly. In that sense, Morocco becomes almost a portal. This land has surprised science more than once. Here they find traces of creatures that redraw our maps of ancient life. And such discoveries are especially valuable because they come from places and ages where we still have far too little material. Every new fragment from there is like a lamp, suddenly lit in a long, dark corridor of history. We begin to make out the walls, the shapes, the outlines of doors. And we realize that the corridor is much longer, and the rooms within it far more numerous than we had believed. Spicomellus matters not only as a sensation, it matters as a reminder that evolution is under no obligation to be convenient for our understanding. It does not strive to create familiar silhouettes. It does not need us to sort animals neatly onto tidy shelves. It works with environmental pressure, with the fear of being eaten, with the chance to survive long enough to reproduce, with millions of small victories and defeats across generations. And if survival in one ancient corner of the world required creating a spiked fortress on 4 legs, nature did exactly that, coldly, precisely, without hesitation. The longer you look into this story, the clearer it becomes. Dinosaurs were not simply big reptiles from a distant past. They were astonishing experiments of life. Some gambled on speed, others on enormous size, others on teeth, claws, intelligence, or collective behavior. But Spicomellus seems to have chosen the path of absolute defense, not to run, not to hide, but to become a problem, a risk, a living warning best avoided. And perhaps there is something strangely modern in that. We too live in a world where survival rarely depends on strength alone. Often what matters more is the form of protection, boundaries, the ability to tell danger, not here. In ancient Morocco, that message was once spoken by evolution itself, not with words, with bone, with spikes, with armor. When we uncover creatures like this, we learn humility all over again, because every such discovery reminds us that the past does not have to be simple. And the Earth was never just a rehearsal for the modern world. Even then, it was already creating masterpieces of strangeness, terror, and ingenuity, long before humans, long before cities, long before the first legends of dragons. Perhaps that is why we are drawn so powerfully to discoveries like this. We look at them and feel not only scientific curiosity, we feel an ancient, almost childlike amazement. That same sensation that comes when you realize reality can be more fantastic than fiction. And if under the stones of Morocco, they found such an impossible beast, who knows what else still waits for us in the layers of the Jurassic world? What forms? What silhouettes? What monsters and wonders? Perhaps the strangest dinosaurs have not even been given names yet. Perhaps they are still lying in the darkness of stone, in the silence of millions of years, waiting for the moment when a human hand gently touches the rock and brings another secret into the light. That is what I love about paleontology. It gives us back a sense of scale. It reminds us how long the history of life truly is and how daring it has always been. It shows how a single discovery can shatter our familiar pictures of the past and replace them with something far more alive, unsettling, and beautiful. Spicomellus is not just a dinosaur from Morocco. It is a message from deep time. A message that life has always been more inventive than fear, and that the Earth has always been a greater storyteller than we can possibly imagine. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If this creature amazed you too, support the video with a like, write in the comments whether you believe the most incredible dinosaurs are still waiting to be discovered, and support the channel with your attention. Stay with us, and until next time.